Hello, everyone, and welcome to Neurodivergent Trauma-Informed Care, presented by Autism Virtually and hosted by myself, Jen. I'd like to start with a disclaimer. I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist, or person holding any degree in these areas, and I'm not claiming to be an expert in this area. I want you to take what you learn here with a grain of salt and do your own research and use self-reflection and common sense before taking suggestions and information provided here on board and applying it to your life. What I am is a mother of a now autistic adult. He's 22. I have 11 years of experience working with autistic children and teens in the behavioral health field. And I'm someone who's constantly learning and verifying current scientific research and heeding the voices of the neurodivergent to learn more and more about autism and other related neurodivergences. I figure if random people can make catchy TikToks that parents and other people will accept and take on board as fact, I believe someone with my extensive background and experience should be putting material out there as well, as a check to help parents learn enough to recognize fact from fiction and good advice and insight from bad. As this is recorded, you will not be able to interact with me via Zoom reactions. However, instead, if you could find a piece of scrap paper and some type of writing utensil, I would like you to do a self-check-in with me. Whenever you learn something that you're like, wow, that's meaningful, or you hear something that may relate to you and your family in some way, I'd like you to make a mark on this paper all the way throughout the training, just to keep yourself involved throughout the entire process. So I'm not just talking to you, I'm talking with you. Let's define each word in the title of this workshop. Let's start by defining what neurodiversity is. The language of neurodiversity has been with us for some time. Autistic Australian sociologist Judy Singer coined the word neurodiversity back in 1997. And the neurodiversity paradigm is based on the biological fact of neurodiversity. It states that neurodiversity is normal, natural, and desirable, and that every mind and brain type is important. So if you have autism, if you have ADHD, if you're bipolar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you are not broken, you are not dysfunctioning, you are valid. The neurodiversity movement is all about equality and appreciating the broad array of diversity within our species and within our brain types. Of course, it's steeped in the principles of the neurodiversity paradigm. It rejects the concepts that brains that diverge from the norm are disordered or dysfunctional, and that brains that don't work in standard ways need to be fixed, treated, or cured. Next, let's define trauma. Trauma is anything that our system can't handle or process. It's not what happens to us, but instead it's what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. This is a quote by Peter Levine, who wrote an amazing book on trauma. And his point is that trauma is subjective. What is traumatic for one person may not be traumatic for the next. We're going to touch on the stress response, as this is incredibly important to understand in its relationship to trauma. So most of the time, the idea is we're supposed to be in a neutral state, right? And when we're in our neutral state, we're working from our emotional brain and our thinking brain, okay? We have three brains. We're going to talk about that in a second. But when we perceive a threat, those two brains shut off and our instinctual brain turns on. The instinctual brain does three very important things. It tells you, should I run? I'm going to run. Do I punch this? And also, I'm going to flood your body with tons of hormones that are going to make it so that if you get hurt, you're not going to feel it so much. And you're also going to be able to run farther and faster than you typically could. And that is the middle. That is the fight or flight response. Once that threat is over, you de-escalate, that brain shuts down, and your thinking brain and your emotional brain turn back on. Trauma is what happens is when you get stuck in one of these parts of the cycle. Trauma happens when you get stuck in your stress response. Now, there are 4 types of stress responses. The first is fight. Are you a fighter? When you're stressed out, do you clench your fists? Does your heart beat fast? Do you argue, say no, grind your teeth or jaw? Do you want to kick or punch something or shout? Perhaps you're a runner, which is flight. You want to hide, you want to run away, you have restless legs, shallow breathing, you feel tense, you feel trapped, and your eyes widen. Perhaps you're a freezer, or you shut down. You want to hide, you feel stuck, heart pounds or slows, trembling or shaky, can't speak. You refuse to follow instructions. At least that's what it looks like on the outside, right? And you just want to be alone. Perhaps you're a fawner. You want to please people. You want to pay compliments, say yes to others, have lots of questions about whatever this thing that's stressing you out is. You over apologize. You don't want to be alone, and you're scared to say what you are really thinking out loud. While I'm reading this, whether you are neurodivergent yourself or you are the parent of a neurodivergent individual, this should start ticking some bells in your brain. A lot of the behaviors that we say are behaviors, like, for example, we may say, my son is super aggressive. Okay, perhaps that is a stress response. They're stressed out, and that is how they react. We have elopers. That's a stress response. They're not running from you. They're running away from the thing that's stressing them out. If we can understand what we're really seeing, we can start making choices, parenting choices, and also individual choices to help ourselves out. There are 3 types of trauma. The first is acute trauma, which results from a single incident, like an awful car accident. Chronic trauma could be you got in a single awful accident, but you have to go through a myriad of painful operations over a couple of months, right? Complex trauma is an exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events, and they're often of an invasive interpersonal nature. So perhaps while you're going through this, you've lost your job, your family's falling apart, etc., etc., etc. That's complex trauma. And the neurodivergent population mostly always deals with complex trauma. There's also something called vicarious trauma that I did not list here. And what vicarious trauma is being traumatized by watching someone you love, or perhaps you don't even know them, go through trauma. If you see someone die, a stranger in front of your eyes, that's traumatic for you. For our kids, when we see our kids struggle, when we see our kids isolated, and we see our kids be bullied, and we know the terrible things they're going through and all the heartache they're going through, that's very traumatic for parents because we love our children. We feel along with them. So parents do go through a lot of vicarious trauma. So lastly, what is trauma-informed care? Trauma-informed care are behavioral health services that incorporate an appreciation for the high prevalence of traumatic experience in persons who receive mental health services. It's a thorough understanding of the profound neurological, biological, psychological, and social effects of trauma and violence on the individual, and the need to presume that the clients we serve have a history of traumatic stress and exercise something called universal precautions by creating systems of care that are trauma-informed. Universal precautions are very helpful. They keep us from re-traumatizing our patients. For the purposes of this workshop, what is trauma-informed care? It's an appreciation for the high prevalence of traumatic experiences in the autistic and neurodivergent population. It's a thorough understanding, or not a thorough, an understanding, took that one out, of the profound neurological, biological, psychological, and social effects of trauma on individuals, and the need to presume that the neurodivergent have a history of traumatic express and exercise universal precautions by creating systems of care that are trauma informed. Okay, so we need to presume that. Let me say that more clearly. And those are the things that we're going to be addressing in this workshop. Here are some harrowing statistics. I'm the statistic lady. I'm always like, hey, did you know? Followed by interesting yet horrifying statistic. Did you know one study showed that 90% of young autistic people with clinical mood systems, so we're talking about DSM-5 diagnosed, that they have experienced at least one trauma versus 40% of the general population who were diagnosed with clinical mood symptoms. Rates of possible PTSD are 32 to 45% versus 4 to 5% in the general population. That's 10 times, people. That's incredibly worrying. And then up to 72% of autistic adults may have severe traumatic histories. A study by Rubin, Stanzion, and Singleton showed that out of 687 adults with autism, 72% had experienced sexual assault, other unwanted sexual experiences, or physical assault, and that 45% of that sample had PTSD. And also showed that cisgender women with autism were significantly more likely to meet the criteria for PTSD. So here's another statistic that's not in here. That 90% of autistic women have report that they have been sexually assaulted or have had other unwanted sexual experiences. Survey data from the U.S. Bureau of Justice statistics showed that in 2011 and 2012, that 30% of women and 19% of men in the U.S. state and federal prisons had a cognitive disability, which is a category that includes autism. This should be worrisome for everyone, no matter whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical. That we have such a high population of people that fit under that. In 2012, a study of 431 male prisoners in the US found an autism prevalence of 4.4%, which is about double the prevalence in the general population. If you look at the WHO statistic, WHO tells us that 1% of the world is autistic. That's then 4 times as many. So if 1% of the world is autistic, 1% of male prisoners should be autistic. There's this wonderful documentary called Being Michelle that really addresses and shines a light on what it's like for someone who's autistic to be caught into the Bureau of Justice, right, into the prison system. She's deaf, which is the primary thing that they talk about throughout the documentary, but she's also like autistic. And at one point, when she runs away, the first thing her caretaker, her helper, tells the police is that she's autistic and deaf and not the other way around, which really showed how important a part of her recipe that was and how she reacted because she has this terrible fear of the police. Definitely take the time to watch it. ADHD toddler kids and teens before the age of 18 hear 20,000 more negative redirections than NT or other neurodiverse toddlers, kids, or teens. That's like 3 a day. If we could take it and spread it out in 18 years, that's 3 a day. I want you to think about starting today, 3 times a day, someone said something to you like, man, that was a stupid thing to do. Why are you being so lazy? You're not doing that right. 3 times a day from today onward for the next year. I want you to think about what kind of, and we're adults, mind you, most of us, right? Listening to this, what kind of effect that would have on your mental health and your self-esteem and just who you were growing to be as a person. Imagine then if this is a child who has no sense of self, you give them their sense of self as a parent and as a community. How damaging that is for them. 80% of ADHD adults have experienced trauma, according to an attitude reader survey. And ADHD kids have an increased risk of exposure to trauma due to a number of key factors. Some examples are interpersonal and self-regulatory problems, which show up as in many ways. One of them is they have a hard time keeping jobs, right? Substance abuse. 1 out of 4 people with a substance abuse problem in the US has ADHD or undiagnosed ADHD. They get diagnosed after. And co-occurring mental health disorders such as anxiety, depression, PTSD, etc., etc. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about 5 um, things that are traumatic for neurodiverse people, and not so much something we think about when we think about, okay, what is traumatic? What are our markers? What's traumatic for most people? I'd like you to take the time to visit www.kellymaher.com. She is phenomenal. She actually runs workshops. This is one of them. This is her information that she shared. And I love that we have information like this, because when I took my not neurodivergent, but my trauma-informed care 8-hour training, right? I asked a lot of questions of the amazing trainer about the neurodivergent, about the autistic, what there was that we learned about them, and she couldn't find anything. So this is a very recent thing that people like Kelly are talking about that really needs to be talked about. Because many times traditional trauma viewpoints do not fully capture the experience of neurodivergent learners, resulting in many children and adults being misunderstood and many underlying needs overlooked. So let's talk about the 5 causes of trauma in the neurodivergent population. One is sensory trauma, and you'll see I added some blue, so that's me thinking you missed this. Sensory overwhelm, learning to hide sensory needs, and sensory under-responsiveness are all traumatic. For example, we can joke and say, going to Walmart is a traumatic experience for us, but it truly isn't. It's annoying, it's loud, you feel it sucks the life out of you, but you can cope with it. When you have sensory overwhelm, it's almost like you're in a war zone and you can't handle everything that's going on, but you can't leave either, because especially if you're a kid and your mom is there, you're stuck there. So maybe, you get aggressive. Maybe you run and hide under something. Perhaps you just put your hands over your ears and shut down. Or perhaps you're just constantly looking for validation because you're fawning, right? Many individuals that experience sensory differences report the world can feel very overwhelming, unsafe, and threatening. And even when it's feeling underwhelming, that can be traumatic as well. For example, auditory sensitivity can cause certain sounds like the sound of a leaf blower, fire alarm, or a person chewing to be extremely painful and insulting to the nervous system, often causing an extreme stress response. And to some without sensory differences, these sounds can seem rather benign, but to a person with sensory differences, living with these daily sensitivities can cause trauma from the repetitive experience of feeling unsafe and fearful. Cause 2 is social trauma, bullying, isolation, feeling different, and masking. From my own personal experience, watching my son, exclusion is just as traumatic as being bullied, being treated like you're nothing. That's somehow kinder. The degree to which neurodivergents experience bullying and isolation tends to be much higher than the general population, and it is generally acknowledged that bullying and isolation can be a cause of trauma. However, the social traumas that are not typically discussed but affect many neurodivergents include the experience of feeling different from others. Especially at younger ages, neurodivergents often report that they did not understand why they felt different. For example, why they just couldn't seem to fit in, or why they couldn't seem to keep up with, or why they didn't think like many others around them. Neurodiversity, or straying from the behavioral norm, is not generally celebrated in our society, therefore leaving many very talented, smart, creative and unique thinkers to feel less than, not good enough, and severely distressed, thus leading to trauma. My son has used the term subhuman. He used the term of feeling subhuman when he was in second grade. He was 7. It is heartbreaking because it is true. We are, as a people, like we want to belong. Children want to belong. And in order to belong, something must not belong. So we must exclude someone else. We must also make ourselves feel better when we're kids by making other people feel worse. Right? And so that often is always directed at the neurodivergent children. And then as adults, we don't do much better. For example, another statistic that came from England is that 80% of autistic workers felt bullied by their coworkers. So it's not something that our kids grow out of or that you can grow out of. Compliance trauma. Yes, the dangers of normalization and surface behavioral approaches. There is a reason why 90% of autistic women get domestic violence or sexual violence. It's because we raise them to be the poster children. We teach our kids, our girls especially, to pretend to be something they're not and to push past their discomfort, that is something that they should be doing, and that can get them into a lot of bad situations. Unfortunately, many neurodivergents have been victims of compliance and normalization approaches. As mentioned in Cause 2, neurodiversity or straying from the behavioral norm is not widely accepted, and approaches to normalize neurodivergence are rampant in our field. Take, for example, some of the social skill programs, which often focus on how to act and how to be socially acceptable in a typical manner in order to give others good thoughts, right? We don't want, the kids in your class to think you're weird, Johnny. So this is how we fit in. This is how you get a positive reaction from others. And of course, it's always good to be kind, but many argue that these social skill programs can be extremely judgmental. Who gets to determine what's socially acceptable for a typical behavior anyways? Cause 4, neurological trauma, communication differences, dealing with uncertainty, and I added seizures to this because 1 out of 3 people with autism have a seizure disorder. And that may be something that is lifelong. And sometimes that's just something that happens during puberty. So it onsets with puberty. And then once you get out of puberty, your brain calms down. Having a seizure disorder is traumatic. And if you are nonverbal and you can't express what's going on, that makes it even more traumatic. As the name implies, neurological trauma can occur from various neurological-based variances, such as communication differences and overwhelm from uncertainty. For example, when a person has the difficulty communicating important needs, desires, thoughts, ideas, questions, it can result in a feeling misunderstood and unsafe, which can result in trauma. And remember, trauma is being stuck somewhere in your stress response. So it's stressful, we get stuck, and we act out. We either fight, run, freeze, fawn. Even for neurodivergents that are conversational and typically talk to communicate, when overwhelm or anxiety strikes, often their ability to communicate in a way that is understood by others can be drastically affected. I have never met any autistic person. My son, for example, speaks eloquently and beautifully, but when he is stressed out, he loses the ability to talk in extreme situations. And in addition to communication differences, navigating uncertainty can be very distressing for many neurodivergents. This is why they often strive for predictability, repetitiveness, or the need for sameness, but then are often mislabeled for being rigid or inflexible, when in fact that is their effort to make the world feel as safe as possible. Okay, so dealing with uncertainty, the world is uncertain. The only thing you know for certain is it's going to be hard. Your day is going to be hard. So one of the things we can do as universal precautions that we'll talk about later is to respect that and to create things like visual schedules to talk to our kids or adults or yourself about what to expect, what's going to happen in a day, to plan your day. And that does not make you rigid. That does not make you inflexible. That makes you human and striving to live your life the best that you can. And cause 5, medical trauma. Being misunderstood by medical and mental health providers. And I added behavioral health providers in this as well. Numerous neurodivergents report distressing experiences when navigating both medical and mental health appointments. Much of the distress stems from feeling misunderstood, unheard, and unaccommodated by providers. Neurodivergence can present medical or mental health needs that may stray from the norm. However, most providers attempt to meet their needs with cookie-cutter approach. This is designed for the successful treatment of the masses rather than an individualized approach that acknowledges and accommodates neurodiversity. I have talked to people who, when they go to the hospital, their energy, like say if they have to go to the ER, their energy is being put into trying not to seem autistic so that the doctors take them seriously because often, if somebody stims or is acting weird, maybe we think they're high. Maybe we think there's something, they have like some cognitive issues, right? Which is not true for most autistic people. So instead of being able to just ask for help at a super low point when you are in a lot of pain and you're scared, you're just trying to mask as hard as you can so that the doctors take you seriously. Some mental health providers will not understand and just expect you to push through stuff, right? That's easy for everybody else. And I added behavioral health providers here because, especially when we're working with children, we can work on some incredibly damaging things. One of the most damaging things mental health provider or behavioral health providers can work on is, say we get a kid and we want to work on eye contact. Okay, we want Johnny to look at us when we're talking to them. Or Sandra, especially Sandra, girls, right? I told you we poster children for abuse. We're creating. Okay, you know what, Sandra? Look at me in the eye for 3 seconds and I'm going to give you a piece of candy. So when we're teaching them to do that, we're teaching them to do something that is incredibly uncomfortable and unnatural for them for a reward. And unfortunately, that kind of thinking just follows through as they grow up. Okay, you know what? If my buddy Lucy is going to be nice to me if I do this thing that I'm uncomfortable with, that's my candy. So I will push through this discomfort. I will not be who I truly am. I will not respect my own needs so that Lucy will like me. And then we have maskers. Then we have hugely high amounts of suicide in our kids, the suicide attempts. And if you're ADHD, you're twice as likely to succeed if with a suicide attempt. It is incredibly damaging. We can damage our kids so much. But on the flip side, because this is what I do, this can be one of the best things you can do for your kids. Hey, okay, so Johnny is doing A, B, and C, and which is really hurting him. He's hurting himself, and this is really bringing his life down, right? Like he's could be succeeding so much more. Let's figure out why we're doing A, B, and C and what we can do to address that. Oftentimes in my job, the parents are the answer. It's something the parents are doing because their kids are like canaries in the mine. If we change our approach, if we change our understanding and allow our children just to be who they are and lean into their strengths, that fixes so much. But a lot of time you need somebody with that behavioral health information and education on board to be able to come and work with you. So it can be extremely positive, but we also can be extremely damaging, just as medical health providers and mental health providers can. So now that we've talked about 5 ways that the world can be traumatic if you're neurodivergent, let's talk about how that trauma affects the body. So what does trauma do to the body? You have a traumatic event, prolonged alarm reaction. Okay, that's the trauma. We got stuck, right? And it alters our neural system. We're going to be talking a lot about our nervous systems as we move on, but the autonomic nervous system is responsible for involuntary functions such as heart rate, digestion, bowel glands, urination, respiratory rate, etc. When a stressful event occurs, it activates. Like I said, instead of you being in your rest, happy place, yeah, you go into your flight, fight, freeze response. And during that, okay, do we run from it? Do we hit it? Do we compliment it? Oh my dragon, what pretty teeth you have. Um, do we just like totally freeze? Is that the best way to go? While we're having this response, automatically cortisol and adrenaline are being released in large amounts, okay? Which is good over a small amount of time. But if you're stuck in your stress response and your trauma stuck, you're like up for, say, I don't know, 20 minutes in this instead of the 2 minutes, 5 minutes that it should be. You're getting much too much cortisone, much too much adrenaline. So if you have too much cortisol in your brain, it can result in weight gain, purple stretch marks, muscle weakness, high blood sugar, high blood pressure, osteoporosis, fractures, and Cushing's disease. If you have too much adrenaline for too long in your body, it does heart damage, insomnia, your jittery nervousness, high blood pressure, shortness of breath, low blood sugar, headaches, tremors, sweating, anxiety. And it damages your hippocampus. Okay. Your ability to learn, form new memories is what your hippocampus does. So your ability to learn is knocked down, and you have a reduced ability for sustained attention. Trauma happens in the body where implicit memory is laid down. There is an incredibly close relationship between trauma and memory. For example, let's say you were 3 years old, you were visiting New York City with your parents, and they gave you a bag of breadcrumbs because, let's feed the birds. It's a New York thing. And you throw out some breadcrumbs, and all of a sudden it's like Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds movie. You're descending by like what seems to you in your 3-year-old mind, hundreds of thousands of pigeons that want to tear you apart. And that's just a memory that you have from when you're 3. Looking at a picture of a pigeon can evoke 20 years later, or if too many pigeons congregate wherever you are, 20, 30, 40 years later, that stress response, that memory clicks in. It doesn't matter how far apart you are from what that initial traumatic event was. It's just like, click, it happened like 2 minutes ago. Biochemistry of the endocrine system is altered. We talked about that by having too many hormones for too long. Epigenetic changes. For example, if you go through enough trauma, enough sustained trauma, your DNA is altered. The blueprints, what makes you you, when you die, if you go through enough trauma, you may die a completely different person than you were born. That's insane that it can change you down to the building blocks of who you are. Sensations and emotions become intolerable. This will never end. There's a speedier process of disease and aging, a compromised immune system. Your stress hormones are going to spike more quickly now, disproportionate to stimuli. An example of that for me is something little goes wrong, and all of a sudden you're just waiting. If you heard the term waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? You're just waiting for the world to blow up. Like this one thing happened, and now all these horrible things are going to come from that. You have constantly elevated stress hormones, and that can lead to long-term health issues of all kinds, some of which I already addressed in the other slide. And now we're going to talk about how trauma affects the brain. And before we can do that, I want you to understand that we have 3 brains within our brain. With a neocortex, the rational or thinking brain, and this is where we want to be spending most of our time. When we are in our neutral state, this is where our brain, our blood, our body's putting into, okay? It's only 2 to 3 million years old, so it's a baby of the family. The limbic brain is 150 million years old, and it's your emotional or feeling brain. And yeah, we want to definitely spend time building this as we're growing up, yes? The reptilian brain, or the instinctual or dinosaur brain, is 250 million years old. Remember, it's the brain that, should I hit it? Should I run from it? Should I compliment it? Should I just like stand here and hope it doesn't see me? Okay, and here's all of these wonderful hormones. That's 250 million years old. So when trauma happens, the brain changes. And by the way, I'd like to point out that these awesome slides, which I meant to do as soon as they started, came from Barb Orr, who I took my training from. She's phenomenal. She gives Zoom trainings, so people all over the world can take her trainings. It's called Orr Training LLC. Like, I highly suggest, if you're looking for someone to give a phenomenal trauma-informed care training to your staff, that she is a lady for you. So some specific events on the brain are disruption of brain development and self-regulation. Remember, whatever brain we're spending time in is the brain we're building up when we're growing up. So if you are a child constantly traumatized, you're spending your time in your dinosaur brain, right? And that is what your body's trying to put all its energy into. So a child who's been under trauma for a very long time, their brains are actually smaller. It affects brain size and brain development, less developed than a child who did not go through that trauma. Same thing, even as an adult, it definitely disrupts how your brain's developing and your self-regulation. It alters neurochemical processes. Remember that hippocampus that's getting hurt, your information processing is taking a dive. Being able to access memories, make new memories, having a hard time. Threat perception is enhanced. So a traumatized brain is a fear-based brain. So if you haven't been under a lot of trauma in your life, you may see something that you've never seen before and be instilled with a sense of curiosity, like, wow, what's that? That's interesting, right? But if you have experienced trauma and that is what your go-to, your brain is traumatized, you're going to see something new and think, oh my God, is that going to kill me? Run away, kill it, get rid of it. And instead of curiosity and interest, it could completely make you want to like get rid of it. Can't be good, not a good thing. No matter what it is, whatever is new is not good. And this is something also you'll see, especially in autistic people, right? They don't like new things because, due to the traumatized brain, the set is like, okay, whatever it is, it's not going to be good. Brain becomes overwhelmed, forgets details, you have difficulty engaging and focusing. Your imagination and creativity is gravely reduced. There is no imagination, or not much anyway, is going on in your instinctual brain as you're trying to get away from the bear, unless like you're coming up with a mouse trap game kind of way to get away from it. And you have great difficulty minimizing the interference of past memories. So something that stays with you. So how trauma affects the brain immediately. When the amygdala identifies a potential threat, it works to sound the alarm by activating the sympathetic nervous system. And we're going to be talking about the sympathetic nervous system and its counterpart, the parasympathetic nervous system, pretty soon. But the sympathetic nervous system is like a gas pedal that floods the body with stress hormones and chemicals such as cortisol and adrenaline, and it puts the body into a state of fight or flight, causing several psychological changes in the brain. We talked about this. You should be like, yeah, yep, got it. With prolonged trauma, however, a disconnect occurs between the emotional and thinking parts of the brain and the right and left sides of the brain. So typical development is, as you're growing up or living your life, you're not worried so much about survival. That's not taking, most of your brain power. Like, yeah, I got to eat something, definitely. Got to pay my bills at the end of the month, sure. But it's not like something that's overtaking your life. So it allows you to have the energy to regulate yourself. And once you're regulating yourself, you're making some social and emotional connections, right? You are also regulating your emotions, which is crazy helpful. Once you've got that going on, man, then we are in our thinking brain, cognition, learning, succeeding, that we can put most of our energy into that. Yeah. But with developmental trauma, just surviving is taking most of all of your energy. Just getting through each day, each moment is a fight. And most of your energy is going to that. And because most of the energy is going to that, you don't have as much for regulation. So you're not as regulated. And if you are regulating, you are using a ridiculous amount of energy to regulate yourself versus on the other side, right? It's not taking a lot of your energy to regulate. If you're managing, which over years we tend to, that one friend, or not to lose your mind when something goes wrong, your emotional regulation, right, is happening again, then perhaps we have a little bit of cognition room here for thinking, learning, succeeding. This is a really great, I found super interesting visual from Barb. And when she was sharing this in our training, and she was reading through all of these things, I was thinking she could be reading like symptoms of autism, right? Because so many, you'll see so many things from the impact of childhood trauma match up with the impact of autism on kids, right? Sleep disorders. 80% of autistic people have sleep disorders. Eating disorders, we're going to talk about this. A lot of people don't realize that neurodivergents are struggle with that a lot. Shorter lifespan, sadly, but true. Poor self-regulation, social withdrawal, poor understanding of social interactions, depression, anxiety, difficulty controlling emotions, all kinds of these things. We could be like, yep, check, check, check. This all also fits for, if we're going to describe the way autism affects your brain, affects a person. I just found that incredibly interesting. So there's definitely a relationship between trauma and neurodiversity. A 2015 study by Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, all they wanted to do was figure out why at this time, right, the average age lifespan of someone who was autistic was 37 years old. That is sad, especially if you're a parent, to think that. That's a hard thought. Okay, I have this lovely, like, 4-year-old autistic daughter who, like, will live to be 37. Like, we see our children growing old, and too many autistic people don't grow old. Now, there's another statistic out there, another study out there, which suggests that now it's like between 52 and 57, which is good. Yeah, but not great. It's better. They should have the same lifespan. My child should have the same lifespan as anybody else, in my opinion. And the way they did this is they looked at the general population, which is a gray bar. Now, whole, mild, severe autism, not a fan of those terms. Autism is autism. Okay, you aren't mild, you don't have a little bit of autism or a lot of autism. You're artistic, no matter how you present yourself. Yes. But in this case, it's actually super helpful. You'll notice that mild autism, or what people will say level 1, that's the thing, right? Not the best. We still need to find something better. Asperger's. Okay, so you'll notice their cancer levels are super high versus everybody else. There's circulatory disorders, which we talked about heart, right? How being stuck in trauma creates too much adrenaline, which destroys your heart. A little bit over the severe autism. Suicide, though, and sadly they are. I mean, I want you to look at that bar. And I want you to look at the little gray bar. And I want you to try to figure out how many bars you would need to equal one of those light yellow bars. And as I said, who tells us that there are only 1% of the world is autistic? And even if you go with 2%, which is what some of the studies are showing. 2% of the world is autistic. That's 98% of the people in that gray bar. 98% of the people in that gray bar. 2% of the world in that yellow bar. Heartbreaking. You'll see also endocrine disorders, mental health and behavioral disorders, neurological disorders. Sadly, definitely. Now, if you look at the gray bar and then the severe autism bar, trying to figure out, wow, like even you can kind of do it with the mild autism bar, right? But the severe autism bar, that would take a lot of trying to figure out how more common it is. And remember, 98% of the world or 99% of the world is in that gray bar. So we're going to talk about why is that? Why are our kids, our adults, ourselves kicking the bucket so darn early? So there's extensive evidence of greater rates of depression and anxiety co-occurring with autism, dyspraxia, and ADHD. For example, nearly 3 in 10 children diagnosed with ADHD have an anxiety disorder. Now remember, we're talking children here, okay? And you're going to find that number is really high for autistic children as well. There are 6, 7-year-olds with autism, probably ADHD, who are diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. Can you imagine? Peak also showed that children as young as 3 or 4 of age with dyspraxia. Dyspraxia is when you have no problem taking in what people are saying, but your body and your brain don't work well to get the words back out. You have to work really hard. There's a disconnect there. So children as young as 3 or 4 years of age with this have had higher rates of anxiety compared to children without the diagnosis. That makes sense. And autism has been associated with higher rates of anxiety. Okay, that which is, of course, a reaction to trauma, correct? Eating disorders. A lot of people don't know this. Anorexia is pretty common with our population in the way that is something that they can control. We talked about how the uncertainty can be so traumatic for the neurodivergent. Well, there are some things in life you can control. You can control what you eat, put into your body, control what you put out of your body, whether that be food or drugs or whatever. Gender dysphoria. I think this probably more likely has to do with the fact that, you know, we may teach our neurodivergent children, hey, look, a man has big muscles and takes care of his family and orders for you, orders for everybody at the table. Maybe we may have this alpha male idea in our head, but like autistic people, ADHD people, neurodivergent people, they don't really have that. People are just people to them. So gender dysphoria, they just have different ideas of what gender is, what expectations are. Mood disorders, let's say this for what it really is, which is struggles to emotionally regulate, which is part of having ADHD, it's part of having autism. Obsessive compulsive disorder, again, it may look like that, it may turn into that. It's all about trying to control things because the world feels so out of control. Personality disorders, schizophrenia, and of course, substance misuse disorders. Honestly, in my experience, I see that much more with the ADHD population versus the autistic population because the autistic population is so black and white, right and wrong. My son had such an idea about alcohol even when he was like small that it was not a good thing. So he's like the Debbie Downer of the party circuit. So what we're going to talk about now is the 2 types of nervous systems we have. We have the sympathetic nervous system, which we don't want to be living in, which we live in too much. Neurodivergent people live in their sympathetic nervous system way longer than they should. Okay, we want to be living in our parasympathetic nervous system or our rest and digest nervous system. When we are in our parasympathetic nervous system, our organs are being regulated, our hormones are being regulated, our breathing is going the way it should, digestion's going great, we don't have gut problems, Our body's running as well as it can run. Something stresses us out, something freaks us out, we go right into our sympathetic nervous system. Okay, and all of a sudden, all of the good stuff that our parasympathetic nervous system was doing, we drop that, not interested in it. Do we run? Do we hide? Do we fight? Do we compliment? Okay, and here's a bunch of hormones to help you not feel pain and be able to run really, really fast, really much farther than you could have run. That's all it does, okay? And it's not where we want to be. So you look at this diagram, right? So there's 3 layers, and I'm going to show you a couple of these diagrams just that frame this information in a different way. So ventral vagal, right? This is where we want to be calm, we're connected, we're settled, we're grounded. Curiosity, there's something new. I wonder what that is. I'm open to it. We're compassionate, we're mindful, right? And we're in the present, we're living in the present. Our digestion is going great, intestinal mobility is going great, resistance to infections up there, immune response is working, rest and recuperation, we're getting sleep, health and vitality, circulation, right? So we don't have dry skin, like we are just rocking that. Our oxytocin is being made, so we can allow social bonds, and we're not reacting to everything with fear. Our ability to relate and connect to others is top notch. Movement in eyes and head turning. Our prosody in voice, which is something for another training. Our breath, we're breathing good. And we're decreased is we're not going to be defensive. We're not, something new isn't going to happen or something unexpected isn't going to happen. We're going to be like, this is bad. Instead, we're going to be like, interesting. I'm open to it. All right. But then something happens. Our nervous system, we get stressed out for something, trigger happens, and we go up into our sympathetic nervous system. Okay, our blood pressure increases, our heart rate increases, fuel availability, we're using it. What we got, we're running through. Adrenaline coursing through our brains, oxygen circulation to vital organs. So we're getting too much air because our heart's going too fast. Blood clotting issues, pupil size, dilation of bronchi. So we're like not being able to breathe in as deeply. Defensive responses are up. We're not saving our fuel. Okay, insulin activity is decreasing. Digestion totally shut down. Salivation in your mouth, not important. Relational ability, not really thinking about, Fred standing next to me, and our immune response goes down. When you're a fight and flight, right? You may be feeling rage, anger, irritation, frustration, panic, fear, anxiety, worry, and concern. Now, the good news, bad news is, say you're stuck in that for too long. Like in a panic attack, your body can only keep this up for X amount of time. Okay. And then you're going to come down. But if you stay in this for too long, you're going to go into something called dorsal vagal phase, which is like the shutdown phase. Okay. Because your body is just like out. You're still in your stress response, but you've run out of cortisol, you've run out of adrenaline, you've run out of the energy fuel to keep this going. So on the way down, you may feel helplessness, okay? Depression, disassociation, numbness. These are all terrible things for your mental health, especially if you don't realize why you're feeling these things, that it's not really a choice, it's just a response. Your raised pain threshold, right? Because you still got some of that, those hormones going in. Shame, shutdown, hopelessness, preparation for death, and trapped. So when you're in this red zone, right? Increased fuel storage, insulin activity, mobilization behavior with fear. So you just aren't doing anything. Endorphins that help numb pain and rise pain threshold are still on board. And a conservation of metabolic resources. So your metabolism goes down, or it goes up, I guess. Decreases, your heart rate slowing down, your blood pressure is going down, your temperature is going down, muscle tone, facial expressions, eye contact. how deeply your breathing has gone down, social behavior, your attunement to human voice. So somebody says, hey, Jen, it's like, didn't hear that. Sexual responses are down, immune response is down. And this is something that neurodiverse people hit much more often than neurotypical people hit, because we get stuck in our stress responses, which traumatizes us at a higher grade than our counterparts. Here's another cool visual, opposite direction, right? Same thing, optimal. Remember, parasympathetic nervous system, good. All right. When you're in that, you're connected, warm, engaged, curious, passionate, grounded. Something happens, trigger happens, and we are mobilized for fight, flight. Sympathetic. If we get stuck in it, in a trauma response, and we can't get out of it, we go into the dorsal vagal. We're shut down. We're mobilized. I really like this particular visual, and I encourage everybody to, I don't know, take a screenshot, print it out, self-check in with this, figure out where you're at, especially if you're neurodivergent. This is where we can be at any point in our day. So there's the super awesome green part, the I am. I'm co-regulating with myself or others, like just, I am not worried about, thinking I can do this. I am doing this. Like it isn't even a thought in my brain. Then of course there's the I can. You feel safe and connected. I can do this. That's still a great place to be in. Okay. Now, if you're thinking in the I must do A, B, and C in order for things to be working right, like things are still okay, they're savable, but I must do A, B, and C, you are going into your sympathetic nervous system. Okay. This is where you really want to turn the I must back into I can. Because if you don't recognize where you're going, you're going to go up into the I hurt phase of the nervous systems. And at that point, you're going to freeze. You're going to feel shame, despair, rage, could be mad at yourself for not being able to do the things that you must do. Like I only had to do these 3 simple things and like I didn't do them. And now like everything's going to crap. I'm in pain. And then there's the I can't, the flop, the collapse, the submit. Okay, I give up. It's over. I just can't. I just can't. And if you're in the I can't part of your brain and you're thinking, it gets a little bit worse. You can get into the black. I have to move this. I can't see the black. But then you get into that black part, which is the red part, right? The worst part you can be, where you shut down. And unfortunately, if you spend too much time there, thoughts of suicide, just ending the pain, right? Especially if you spend so much time in trauma responses that you're spending a lot of time in the yellow, the red, and the black. So there are ways to get off the trauma response train, and we're going to go over 13. If you can think of any more and want to leave them in comments, that's awesome. Please, ready to learn, and put some more info on board. So there's therapy, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy, we're going to talk about. Having a therapist who's neurodiverse is like a huge boon. You need someone who really gets it. Number 2, stop and think. You want to engage your thinking brain. 3, glimmers. 4, emotional support items or some other anchor. 5, co-regulation. A service animal can be helpful for co-regulating. 6, know your triggers and plan accordingly. 7, remove yourself from the environment or the trigger. 8, set appropriate boundaries. We neurodivergent people do not do that. We feel that, hey, if someone's gonna like us, that's a lucky thing, and we got to work to make that go, because there's so many things not okay with me that I'll be able to accept a lot more crap from this person as long as they stick around. And of course, that gets us into those statistics where so many neurodivergent folk are sexually abused, or domestic violence happens to them, etc., etc. You want to get in your right nervous system and stay there. Number 10, engage your vagus nerve. We're going to be talking about that. It's a wonderful thing. Love it. 11, learn about self-reflect about what's something called rejection sensitive dysphoria. We're going to be talking and learning about that. 12, positive self-talk and compassion for yourself, right? The world's going to beat you down. You don't need to help them. And 13, you want to take adequate time for self-care and mental health. So let's spend a little bit of time talking more about each of these 13 suggestions. Cognitive behavioral therapy is all about breaking a negative cycle. The thoughts we have, what we think affects how we feel and act, right? And how we act and what we do affects how we think and we feel. And our emotions, what we feel affects how we think and we act. So we can be caught in a negative thing. Like, for example, if I wake up and I'm going to be like, I'm going to have a terrible day. This is going to be a crap day. That's my thoughts. My behaviors are, I'm not going to care about, picking out a super nice outfit, spending extra time to look good, feel good, and feed myself because it's just going to be a crappy day anyway. So that affects how I behave. And then my emotions, of course, are affected by my thoughts. It's going to be a crappy day. So I'm feeling depressed and down and not feeling good. Okay, or I wake up and think, oh, today is going to be a great day. Today's going to be a great day. You know what? It's going to be a great day. I'm going to put some extra effort in getting ready for this awesome day. I'm going to brush my teeth, right? I'm going to comb my hair. Maybe I'm actually going to put it up in a nice little, braid or something instead of just letting it fly all over. You know what? Which is our behaviors. So if we're thinking, hey, we're going to have a great day, and we're thinking positively, that's affecting how we behave. And if we're thinking we're going to have a great day, our emotions are excitement, happiness, looking forward to what's coming instead of like wanting to hide from it. If you have a trauma brain, that's going to be fear. It's a fear-based brain. So emotions, that's what's going to be running the show right there. So having someone who's outside of that box who can help you like break those thought patterns is super helpful. I've had somebody who does that, and she like helped me a tremendous amount. Okay, number 2, stop and think. There's something called ADHD overwhelm, and it feels like anxiety, right? But it isn't. So if you can just, whatever you're feeling stressed out and you're getting caught in your stress response, just stop. Just stop everything. Sit down, breathe, give yourself a couple minutes. Let your thinking brain kick back on, because it will, if that is what the problem is. And also, even if that isn't what the problem is, giving yourself that space will allow your thinking brain to kick back on. You want to be making choices from your thinking brain, not your, do I hit it, do I run from it brain. Glimmers are awesome. They're the opposite of triggers. And instead of triggering fight, flight, or freeze, they glimmer safe and good. This can be a person. You can think about a person, maybe your grandma who always made you feel safe, and a hug, like a grandma hug, like what it felt like to be in her arms. And maybe the smell of the powder she used or her perfume. It takes us back to our happy, safe, socially engaged state. You can think of the phrase a glimmer of hope, joy, light, and that glimmer can take you from your trigger stage and put you right back down, especially if it's like just right off the bat, bring you right back down. My glimmer is Diet Coke. I always have a Diet Coke with me. I have one with me now. That just taking a drink of that, it's amazing. All's right in the world as long as I have a Diet Coke. If I'm going on a longer day trip, I bring 2 or 3. Hey, whatever works for you, in a positive way, of course. Emotional support items can really help people feel grounded and safe. So you may notice not only kids, but some adults. You may notice an adult in Walmart carrying around a Thomas the Tank toy. And that is an emotional support item. That is something that they can look at that may be acting as a glimmer, right? It's keeping them together. It's keeping them out of their sympathetic nervous system. It's keeping them in their parasympathetic nervous system. Music is a great way. You'll see people with headphones on. Sometimes headphones is just getting rid of noise, but for some people, listening to music when you're in like hard times can really help. It can be your phone, a tablet. So, hey, taking a tablet away from your autistic child in Walmart, not a good idea. That might be the only thing keeping them okay, okay enough. Anyways, books. It can be a book, it can be anything. So you can often see people bring emotional support items along. My emotional support item that I bring sometimes because I saw it in Walmart and it was $25. I usually don't spend that kind of money on myself. So little Steve from Stranger Things and his little ice cream suit and the 80s. I don't know, something about the 80s, even though it was rough at the time. When I think back to the 80s, it makes me feel like that is my happy place. And I can look at Steve, I can touch Steve in my pocket. Super helpful. Brings me right down. They do work. So this might be something you might want to try. If you want to co-regulate, especially ADHD people need to co-regulate. Co-regulating is basically borrowing someone else's nervous system. So say you're the parent of a neurodiverse child who's having a hard time. They're stuck in their stress response, so you're seeing some of those behaviors. The best thing you can do for them is to stay calm. Don't raise your voice. Lower your voice, right? You can maybe be a little bit quieter. Lower your body position, soften your facial expression, model deep breathing, do heavy work together. Give them something to do that's going to relieve all the pressure inside of them. Take a walk outside, offer deep pressure. Not all kids, teens, adults like that, so make sure it's something that works for them. Model a preferred sensory activity. Move your body together, dim the lights, stop talking. We don't always have to talk. I don't know why we feel that way. And change your proximity. You know, sometimes if someone's having a hard time, just sitting near them quietly and existing is the best thing you can do for them. So learn what co-regulation is. Find something to co-regulate with. It could be a pet at home. And if you really struggle with regulating your emotions and your mood and your brain and regulating your sensory stuff, you can often use an anchor like a service animal to help you with that. Know what triggers your trauma and plan accordingly. Certain sounds can trigger your trauma. People, seeing someone who's related to the trauma or has a certain trait physically can trigger you. Thoughts definitely trigger you. Certain thoughts or memories. And remember, trauma makes it really hard not to connect to those traumatic memories. It's just much too easy. Smells. Some smells may be connected to traumas. Places, a place where the trauma took place can be a strong trigger. So, for example, if you were bullied like a ton at school, maybe, you know, going to your high school reunion, the same place is not the best choice. Media, news reports, and so those things we can't, you know, mitigate. But if there's a particular movie or TV series that may have some triggers in it, avoid it, right? Feelings, sometimes a feeling or an emotion can trigger a trauma, like a sad feeling or being in pain. Or if you're in a situation that's similar or reminds you of your trauma, it can be a trigger. So know what triggers you and plan accordingly. Don't watch a series that may have some stuff in it that's going to have you a total mess at the end of it. Okay. Stay away from people who trigger you. Stay away from places that trigger you. If news reports can be very triggering to you, try to avoid the news like throughout your day when you're just trying to have a good day at work. Okay. Etc. 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 We're going to talk about where a trigger is in the behavioral escalation cycle. So you're calm. There you are, being calm. And then just itty bitty up, there's a trigger. Just a tiny bit up trigger. And if we don't recognize it, that's what's triggering us and remove ourselves from it, we're going to get agitated. That's going to accelerate until we lose our collective SH, you know what? We'll de-escalate, right? Possibly, if we're lucky, we'll de-escalate. Although we might peak up here, right, and go into the whole shutdown phase, which isn't good. But let's just say that From here, we start coming down and then we recover. See where recovery is from that trigger? There's calm, really close to the trigger. Recovery is super far. It is so important to know your triggers and to remove yourself from your triggers if you can. It can save you so much unnecessary sympathetic response, trauma response. So recognize your triggers and when possible, if possible, remove yourself from that trigger before things go wrong. Benefits of setting boundaries. Setting appropriate boundaries with other people and with yourself provides not autonomy. It wards off burnout, which is something that neurodiverse people struggle with religiously a lot. It improves your mental health. It improves your relationships because you have like better boundaries. The people that are in your circle treat you better, right? Which improves your relationships. Clear expectations for others. People know what you will accept and what you won't accept. They're more likely to make sure that they don't go past your boundaries. Decrease stress, which is great because remember, any stress response is a chance to get caught. It's trauma. Improve self-care capabilities. And you have respect from others, and you have respect for yourself. Often, this is something the neurodivergent population, the neurodiverse population struggles with because we do struggle with creating relationships with others and keeping relationships with others. So our bar is pretty low. We need to raise it. So we're going to talk a little bit about your hyperarousal states and your hypoarousal states. Remember, hyper is when we're going into that yellow or orange, whatever color it was, we've left green, right? And then hypoarousal states is when we are run out of energy, but we're still tip top. So we didn't bring ourselves down enough to have that go to that recovery phase. So it's super important to know what nervous system you're in and to stay in it, because when we don't, this is the kind of stuff that happens. We can get stuck in hyperarousal states, right? Where our mind is racing, we're easily startled, anxious, chest pain, nervous, rapid heartbeat. We're agitated, we're not sleeping, we're not eating, we're having a hard time concentrate, our breathing is shallow. We need to recognize that, hey, if A, B, or C, or D is happening, I'm in a hyperarousal state. I need to do something about it. Recognize what nervous system you're in. By the time you're in hypoarousal states, I don't know, you've got nothing but time to kind of heal you from that. That ship has sailed for sure. Foggy, confused, fatigue, lethargic, dislike of exercise, brain fog, dissociation, low motivation, slow wound healing, depersonalization. If you notice that you're feeling these things and you're in a hypoarousal state, there are some things you can do. A lot of self-care. You need to do a lot of self-care, a lot of self-compassion. It's going to take time. It's not like you can take a bubble bath and boom, you're better. Like, give yourself the time and the space you need to heal. And then, if you can figure out what got you into this depths of shutdown, you can start hopefully changing what you're doing to make sure that you stay in the right nervous system. So there's this thing called the vagus nerve, and it is a wonderful thing. I don't know about you, but if somebody tells me to calm down, it has like the opposite effect. Like, I hate it when people tell me to calm down. It just does the opposite for me. But it turns out that you don't have to choose to calm down. Your vagus nerve is located at the roof of your mouth. Now, if you're alone, I can encourage you to do this. There's nothing wrong with sucking your thumb as an adult. But if you did suck your thumb, if the pad of your thumb is actually pushing up against your vagus nerve, right? And if we can stimulate that nerve, it puts you right back into your sympathetic or into your parasympathetic nervous system. So you don't have to choose. Your child doesn't have to choose to calm down. You can have the vagus nerve choose for them. So if we can stimulate that vagus nerve, we can get them and yourself right back into your correct nervous system. Now, you may stress out again afterwards, but you can constantly reset your own nervous system. Babies suck their thumb and suck on pacifiers because it stimulates their nervous system. It keeps them in the right nervous system where all their organs are working the best they can, and all of that. It's very interesting. So 11 ways to stimulate this nervous system, or this vagus nerve, is hugging. Well, it says. So it says exercise, probiotics, meditation, intermittent fasting. Haven't tried that one. Yoga, breath work, definitely. Omega-3s, singing, massages, splashing cold water on your face will absolutely put you right back in your nervous system. Not my preferred way of doing it. Gardening works, gargling, laughing, humming, chanting, and 5-finger breathing. So deep breaths often do work if you take enough of them, because as you're breathing, you'll feel that air go along the roof of your mouth, which stimulates that nerve. And 5-finger breathing is actually a really cool thing you can teach your kids to do, or you can do when you catch yourself in the wrong nervous system. Here's a short video explaining how it works. Sorry, come on, there you go.
Hey, so today I am going to teach you a new breathing technique because so many of you like the box breathing, and this one is called finger breathing, and it was suggested to me by a colleague recently. So it's super simple and you can learn this with colleagues, you can teach it to kids, you could show this video directly to kids. If you are doing, hi kids, hi, do you like my dog? It's Buddy. Okay, so first of all, take your hand in front of you, spread it out, think like a starfish, okay? And what we're going to be doing, we're going to take a finger from our other hand and we're going to trace around our fingers. So we get to the top of each finger, we're going to pause. As we get to the bottom, we pause. So trace nice and slowly, pause, trace and pause, trace and pause. Okay, so now we're going to add the breathing in. Okay, so as you move up, breathe in, pause, breathe out, pause, breathe in, pause, and out, pause, breathe in, pause, and out, pause, in, pause, out, pause, and in, pause, and out. Okay, now you've done that, give your hand a little shake. Now stop and have a think. How do you feel now? Do you feel a bit calmer?
How do you feel now? Do you feel a bit calmer? She's also chanting. So when she was even doing that, you're going to bring your finger up, pause. Like I was starting to feel a little bit calmer just listening to her repeat that. But it absolutely does. The reason how it works, it puts you back into your parasympathetic nervous system without having to want it. Okay, it's fantastic. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what rejection sensitive dysphoria is. This is something that is infamous for ADHD individuals, but also for autistic individuals or any neurodivergent individuals who have experienced a lot of rejection in their lives. Mental health professionals have examined the effects of rejection for many years. And although it's not an official diagnosis, rejection-sensitive dysphoria entails emotional sensitivity caused by criticism or negative feedback, and in some cases, failing to meet one's own expectations can also trigger these symptoms. And this is why with ADHD, it's so prevalent, because often you're failing to meet your own expectations, and you trigger yourself. So what are some of the triggers for rejection-sensitive dysphoria? There's external triggers, right? And this is the rejection that comes from others, which is directed at you. And this is something that all neurodivergent people experience at some time. You've done this wrong. You're a bad friend. You weren't successful. You're too quiet. Anything that is negativity directed at you from the outside. And then there is the perceived trigger, which is a rejection that you perceive from the words or actions of others. For example, if you say, hey, Johnny, do you want to hang out later? And they're like, oh, no, not today. Your thought is, they don't want to hang out with me. They must hate me. Versus Somebody who doesn't have this might think, okay, Johnny must have other plans. They may think, I did this wrong. They must think I'm stupid, right? If I don't do this for them, then they will hate me. It's always like, if A happens, awful B is going to happen because I'm such a louse and a screw up, and who would love me, right? And of course, there is the internal, which is a rejection we have internalized. It comes from our own thoughts and feelings, right? Which, of course, is affecting your perceived, right? I'm a bad person. I'm such an idiot. I hate myself. RSD is common in neurodivergence. Being different means that you're being frequently rejected. And you have an acute memory of past rejections, which can result in PTSD. You have intense sensory and emotional reactions. Of course, we've talked about how trauma plays a role in that. You have difficulty reading tone. You're tired of being underestimated. All of these things work together to make this a common thing. What's important is to remember and to self-check that if you have that thought, when you think, if a friend says, no, not today, and you catch yourself going into, oh, that's because he hates me, he doesn't really like me. That you self-check, okay, you know what, this is RSD. It's not true. It's a negative thought pattern. So I'm going to replace that with, I'm sure Johnny's just has other plans. And it's not a reflection of how they feel on me. Like, everything doesn't have to be a reflection on how someone feels about you. Positive self-talk will really help with RSD. Okay, and the benefits are you have a healthier immune system. Because remember, people who go through a lot of trauma, right, have a lot of sicknesses, a lot of diseases, age quicker, all of that. So if you can talk to yourself kindly and build yourself up, you're going to be in the right nervous system. You're going to stay in the right nervous system, and you're going to avoid getting sick a lot. Reduced pain, have better cardiovascular health, again, because you're not going into the wrong nervous system. You have improved mental health, same reason. Improved self-esteem, same reason. Increased vitality, you're gonna have more energy. You have greater life satisfaction if you feel good about yourself. Reduce stress. You have a better physical well-being. You stay healthier, and you're going to live longer. Yes, people who talk to themselves kindly and people who stay out of their sympathetic nervous system for long periods of time, all of these things are connected. They live a lot longer. It's incredibly important that you take the time to be compassionate with yourself and to rewrite your script. So if you catch yourself like, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. Why did I do that? Okay. So you thought that, stop yourself and replace that with, you know what? I've just really have a lot on my plate right now. Everybody makes mistakes. I'll just have to keep mental note this so I don't do this again or whatever. But being forgiving with yourself and talking to yourself kindly is a key to living a long, healthy, happy life. The last thing we're going to talk about is self-care. So there's 7 pillars of self-care that we're going to go over. But there are some myths about self-care. Some people think that self-care is an indulgence, especially if you're a parent. Like if you're, I don't know, fathers may do self-care, mothers, we do not. We care for everybody else. But meaningful self-care includes making mindful changes of patterns and thoughts and behaviors that do not contribute to your well-being. So, for example, yeah, you have 3 kids, you have a husband, you have all this stuff. But if you don't take care of yourself first and make sure that you have good thought patterns and that you're having positive behaviors, it's not going to contribute to your well-being or your family's well-being if you don't take the time to self-care. Self-care is not an indulgent, it is necessary. Self-care is selfish. When you make time for yourself and get sufficient rest and exercise, you feel more energetic and will be able to do more for yourself and for those around you. Self-care is not selfish. Self-care is the most unselfish thing you can do for your family and for your kids and for yourself. Self-care is a one-time experience. Not true. Self-care is a bunch of small choices in my life that I've only been making since I've finally had therapy and I've been breaking these thought patterns. So I know for me, perhaps it used to be a one-time experience, but looking after yourself is an ongoing practice in building resilience to face hardships and in preventing burnout. Maybe it's, having a cup of taking time to have that cup of tea in the morning, um, taking the time to do something at night that you find relaxing. And there's also the myth that self-care is time consuming. It does not need to be. Self-care does not require you to take a huge chunk of time from your busy day. It can be taking a few minutes here and there. And don't feel bad. It's not selfish if it is taking a big chunk out of your day if you actually really super need it. So there are 7 pillars of self-care. The first is mental. You need to take care of your mental health, right? Um, your emotional health, your physical health, your environmental health, your spiritual health, your recreational health, and your social health. And you must take care of all of these things in order to be truly taking care of yourself. Some examples might be physical. Self-care could be getting exercise, which creates endorphins, which puts you in a good mood, right? So taking the time to exercise every day. Environmental might be taking yourself out of a bad situation. It might be avoiding some of your triggers. It might be keeping things tidier, because I know a tidier house makes me feel better about myself. It could be spiritual, making the time to go to church if that's what feeds your soul, right? And it doesn't, even if you're not religious, there are some spiritual things you can do, like taking the time to be kind to somebody else or, make the world a better place. For me, that is a spiritual thing. Um, Recreational, take time to do the things that you enjoy. Don't make all of your family outings and all your outings based on what other people like to do. That could be a boundary that you have, Social, make sure you reach out to people and that you're not self-isolating, etc., etc. So make sure that you're taking care of all of these pillars in order to be truly taking good care of yourself. So what are some of the most important universal precautions for this population? Number one is believe what they are telling you. Believe what you're telling yourself. Don't dismiss when you're having a hard time. Okay. Believe that you're having a hard time for a reason. If your child says it's too hot, believe them. Find a way to cool them off. Secondly, mitigate, or set up the environment to adapt to the person. Neurodiversity put a thought that, you know what, if a person is struggling in their environment, then the problem isn't with the person. The problem is the environment. And you can change that environment to the person. As adults, we do that all the time. You know, we set up our houses and we set up our lives in ways that benefit us, that we work the best way, right? And we can teach our kids to do that, and we can do that for our kids. We can do that for ourselves. We want to start changing the environment to help us be the best that we can be. You want to stay in and return to the right nervous system. Incredibly important. We deal with a lot of trauma, so we need to be aware of what nervous system we're in. We need to try to get out of when we can, avoid it when we can, and making all of these choices will really affect how positive and how well your life is going to be going from this point on. And you have to remember that growth rate is dependent on the individual. It's not a choice. It's not like Johnny can choose to get the skill down in a day, right? We grow as to how we are made. So, and that's also true with ourselves. Like, we can't be hard on ourselves because it's taking us longer to be able to achieve A, B, or C than it took Paula to achieve it, or like Paula and like 99 other people, it looks easy for, but for you, like, it's hard work and it's slow going. And that's okay. We need to give ourselves the freedom to grow at our own rate and the understanding, and we need to support our own selves and how long things take. And we support our children. You know what? They're going to grow at the rate that they're going to grow. What we can do to help them grow quicker is to make sure that we are taking these universal precautions, not re-traumatizing them, setting up the environment so they could succeed, mitigating where we can, and believing them. I want to thank you so much for your time and attention. And I want to leave you with this quote. Laurel K. Hamilton writes a series. She likes to write about vampires who aren't real, allegedly. But I really like this quote from her, and it's very true. There are wounds that never show on the body. They're deeper and more hurtful than anything that bleeds. We need to be aware that the most hurtful injuries and wounds that our children have, that our teens have, that our adults have, that we have as people are invisible. So please, take the time to put all of the things that we've talked about into practice in order to be able to respect and help people with their pain. All right. Thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed talking with you about this. Take a moment to look at your paper to see how many marks you've made, and do take time to think about everything we've learned.